All right, everybody, welcome to another podcast. And this podcast is called Think Your Way to an Epic Life. This is a little unique. This was a request from a really good friend of mine who recently lost his grandfather and did not want those stories to be lost. We can learn so much from what Jake has to share. I really think that you're going to enjoy this. It is a little emotional at times, but it is, it's kind of the route to success, to happiness, and all the above. So enjoy. Thanks for watching and sharing it with your friends.
All right. So, like I said, I was talking to my father, and we were talking a little bit about, recently we look at, my dad is retired, right? And he originally got into a program in Louisiana in what used to be USL. It's now University of Louisiana in Lafayette, which was an animal husbandry program. And the reason why he did that was because they needed a veterinarian on the ranch that my grandfather had. He owned 40 sections in Pecos, Texas.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay, for clarity, for people who have no idea that a section is 640 acres, what does that add up to?
That's 40 square miles of land.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would take, my dad told me on the phone over the weekend, it would take him to go mend fence. It would take him an entire day on horseback to ride to the other side of the property to mend fence. And then it would take a day to ride back. So it was a large property, and they ran cattle on the property. There's also, for landowners, there are benefits and grants that you can receive for the government when you don't graze cattle on your land. And so you can actually have acreage of land that you get paid for not raising cattle, or not farming or utilizing the land. So they also did that, but they started a long time ago. And this is kind of, the story of this is really about, honor and doing what you say you're going to do. And as you know, that's one of my core beliefs. I wear a shirt that says, because I said I would and nothing else, because that's really, I think, something that was imparted on our family a long time ago. And that was really, I think, coming from my grandfather, Otis. And so a long time ago, these 40 sections that got set up, what happened was that what we would call him Pappy used to run horses across the Mexican border and sell them in the United States. He would go down and get liquor and horses and then run them across the border, and he'd sell them in the United States. So he was truly like a cowboy, like an outlaw. Wow. And he married a woman in a saloon owner from way back in the day. So she was truly, sorry for the language, she was truly a whore that owned a saloon. And he married her, and I actually have the pool table from that saloon in my house today.
Wow.
And my pappy branded it with the Circle H brand, which was, our brand on that 40 section ranch. So from that marriage, he had a son, which was Otis. And Otis, in order to make money for the family, and this was back in a lot of ranch land was around, he, at the age of 13 years old, started flying fixed wing aircraft. And so he started crop dusting. He started younger than that. By the time he could lift a 40-pound sack of dust over his shoulder and fill airplanes, he started doing that for money, and then eventually started flying the fixed wing aircrafts on their own. And in Pecos, he was the first to start using helicopters to crop dust. And my dad had told me, whenever he started working with him, that whenever you're crop dusting, usually there's a person on the ground that holds a flag up, and they hold it above the rows of whatever you're crop dusting, so that the plane knows, where to be able to spread dust. And then they come around, they do a big loop and come back the other way. So you would count 13 rows of whatever it is, and then stop and hold the flag up, and then count 13 more rows. When he was flying fixed wing, he could walk those rows because you would have to make big, long loops in this airplane and come back around. When he flew helicopters, he could spin it around really fast and come straight back down. So my dad was sprinting from row to row to be able to actually get all of these crop dusted, and he could do twice as many fields. So he was making much more money than the average person. And so, they raised hay on their ranch. They raised horses and cattle. And then also Otis worked as a crop duster, and my father, of course, helped him as they grew up. At that time, he had two sons, which were my dad, Mark, and my uncle, Russell. And so they had this ranch there and hit hard times, of course, property tax, everything else that goes along with owning that ranch. So they actually subdivided it up and started selling it to the township of what is now Pecos. If you drive through Pecos, Texas now, you'll see, and my father told me this over the weekend, you'll see a bunch of homes and then there'll be a vacant lot and then there'll come more homes at a vacant lot. And the likelihood that my grandfather owns that vacant lot is like 80%.
Oh, wow.
Because it was part of their original ranch, which was insane. But he was looking for work to be able to do something outside of, crop dusting. And because he flew helicopters, he got a call from the port of New Iberia for, I think it was Mobile that he started working for first. And he started flying people offshore, which is where the real kind of him becoming a stellar helicopter pilot really came to be. By the time he retired, he became a consultant for the firm he was working for. And he had the most time off the ground as any human being. He held a world record for it at the time that he retired. He retired when he was like 82 years old, and he started flying when he was 13. So pretty crazy.
Gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they moved to New Iberia, Louisiana, and he started flying helicopters offshore. And he flew for several different companies over the time frame, but in the beginning it was because he kept getting fired. The first job that he got fired from, it was his mistake. It was truly a safety issue. However, my grandfather, coming from West Texas, didn't like the rain. And he was living in Louisiana where it rained all the time. And so he had flown a group of, workers offshore to a rig. He had come back in, and whenever he was coming back in, he ran into rain. And so he flew his helicopter into the hangar and turned it around and parked it rather than letting them kind of wheel it in and turning off the engines. He didn't know that there were people in the rafters working. They were doing like electrical work and stuff like that up in the rafters. And so it was an extremely dangerous situation. However, we always found it funny because on his wall, he still had the write-up that they wrote him up for, termination write-up for flying his helicopter into a hangar. And then the reasoning, employee comments, it said, "I didn't want to get wet," is what he actually wrote in the employee comments. So he was terminated from that job. And then around the same time period, he gets another job working for a different company that's, piloting people out or carrying people out to the rigs. And in that company, he had an argument with his superior about whether or not helicopters could turn upside down and fly. And my grandfather said, "No, I can fly a helicopter upside down. I've done it before." And his supervisor was like, "That's impossible. The way that the blades work, the way that everything works on a helicopter, you can't do that." And he was like, "No, I can do it. I can prove it to you." And so the supervisor said, "Fine, prove it to me." So they got into a helicopter, and my grandfather took him up and turned it upside down and flew it for a while, and then turned it back over and came back and landed the helicopter. And right whenever he landed on the ground, he said, "You're fired." So he lost that job.
Wow.
And then I think it was whenever he was working for Mobile. This was a story that I was actually reminding me about. So we were talking about the need to kind of to be bought into the things that you believe. And in, the world of helicopter pilots, it's life or death, right? And inside of our world, inside of, normal business life and things, it's not so much a life or death situation where what you say and the actions that you take make dramatic impacts, not only on you, but the people that you're, put in charge of. But we were talking about it in the manner of, my father worked in Chevron for 40 some years, and he always had this like buy-in and this belief that the people that he worked with, he was doing things to make them safer or doing things to make sure that they were protected no matter what decision that he made. And that's always kind of the way that he thought about it. And I told him on the phone, I said, I believe that I do the same thing in my world. Whenever I consult with a broker, whenever we talk about coaching or consulting people through issues, I'm trying to help them to self-discover things that will protect them or make them safer in the long haul. And that kind of idea of buying into other people and saying like, I'm here for you and I'm kind of like your guardian person. And we talked a little bit about how we thought that kind of came from Otis. And my father brought up this specific situation where my grandfather flew twin engine helicopters. And they could carry massive amounts of people. And so there was a storm that was happening in Louisiana, a hurricane. And so everyone gets evacuated except for essentially mechanics during that time. And so mechanics will stay on the rig to be able to make sure things still function. And, there's only really one or two people that remain. Everyone else really gets evacuated. And so he was in the middle of evacuations. He had made a couple of trips out, and the last trip when he was coming back in, one of his engines went down, which meant he could no longer hover to land. He had to roll in, basically, kind of taxi in. And he wasn't going to be able to make it back to the airport. So he called into the tower and told them that he was going to have to make an emergency landing. He knew he was going to make it on the Evangeline Three-Way, which is essentially a road that runs from I-10, where I believe it's I-49, runs into I-10 just north of Lafayette, Louisiana. And then it runs all the way down through New Iberia and along the coast to New Orleans. And it's a state-funded highway. I'm not sure why federal government decided that they would no longer fund the interstate to go that direction. However, so it's a loop south that connects I-10 between Lafayette and New Orleans, rather than going north around to Baton Rouge and across the Atchafalaya Basin. So he knew he was going to land on that Evangeline Three-Way, and it's a large three-way now. Back then it was probably only, 2 lanes, but it's pretty cleared out, deforested. But there are power lines that run across it. So he asked that state troopers or sheriffs or local, police mark the power lines with their lights on, police cars with their lights on, so that he could see gaps between the power lines where he could take the helicopter into. Well, they missed one. And whenever he came in, he had 6 passengers with him, and the helicopter blades caught the power line and it ripped the blades off of the helicopter. But he was still able to land it and taxi it down and kind of keep control of it and saved those 6 people's lives. And there's a lot of things I think that can happen in that world. But it's amazing to me the determination or loyalty that pilots, both in the commercial world today, in these kind of situations where you really feel pretty safe, the importance that they hold in our world to be able to say that they have the experience and the ability to save you truly in a really major situation. And so that was one of the things that, of course, gained him a lot of admiration, I think, inside of the world, that helicopter, flying world. But he was able to save that group of people. And we talked further about, whenever I went into the oil field and I started working, because my father, I didn't want to go to college. I thought it was dumb. And I thought I knew everything. I was young. And so my father said, well, come and work in the oil field and see what it's like. What real work really is, right? Mm-hmm. So he connected me with a company called Dynamic Oil Tools, which is essentially a construction company for oil companies. We do things like hot bolting, which is, replacing the large bolts and nuts and stuff, and then we take them off and then weld them back onto platforms. We replace, +10 grading and that kind of stuff, so that, oil rigs stay maintained. Because they'll rust out and things like that will happen. So I was working with Dynamic Oil Tools, and one of the things that you have to do, regardless of the position that you're in, whether you're on land as a field rigger or whether you go offshore, in the event that you ever do want to go offshore, one of the things you have to do is water immersion training, which is essentially when a helicopter hits the water, because it crashes, it turns over upside down because of the way that they're designed, and they have buoys on the bottoms of them, so that it'll turn upside down. And whenever you turn upside down, the windows can be popped out. But there's a certain order you have to do it in. You have to be trained to be able to understand, like, you can't release your seatbelt and still pop a window open when you're underwater because you're weightless. And so you don't have the leverage to do it. So you have to do things in a specific order, and popping out the window. Once the window has been popped out, undoing your seatbelt and then pulling yourself out with your arms and not kicking your feet so you don't kick the person behind you. So there's all of these kind of specific things that you have to learn. And I told my dad, I said, well, Otis had never gone down in the ocean before, right? Like that, you don't really hear about that often. It's not like I hear the news all the time and I hear it like, another helicopter for Chevron went down in the ocean. Like that's not something that I think is very typical. And I was questioning my father on that, and he kind of laughed. He said, no, actually there was one really close call that he had. What I did not know, he held the world record for the lowest engine restart in a helicopter, which I think he said was like 5 feet or 7 feet. And he said what had happened is that they had picked up a bunch of people, or maybe he had just dropped them off on this rig, and he was returning. And so he went to take off of the oil rig. And for those who don't know, on an oil rig, the helicopter platform is on top of the housing unit. So I kind of have 2 stories about this, one about my father and one about Otis. But he was taking off of that helicopter platform, and the engine died whenever he came off of the platform. And so he immediately started dropping through the air. And there's a procedure you can do, apparently, not sure, where you can actually flatten the blades of a helicopter to make them turn in the air as it's falling, to be able to try and get it to restart. And so that's what he did. He was able to react fast enough to get the engine to restart, and he just picked it back up and landed it back up on the oil platform, which is really intense considering the helicopter pad is right on top of the living quarters. So, I mean, a wrong move in that situation, too short of the landing pad, you're running into people's dorms and into people and, killing people. So I think with that, we were, talking a little bit about just like decisions that we make and risk compared to reward, and maybe it was him not wanting to get wet, but his ability, to judge in that moment and say, is it better for me to hit the ocean, right, and ditch out, or is it better for me to try and get this thing started and actually make it back to the helicopter landing pad, which, I'm sure companies would say it was better because they get to save money. But I was just trying to think of like the human aspect of it. So that was really interesting. And then we got into a conversation. There's this, for my father, there's this plaque that hangs on the wall in my mom and dad's house in the hallway. And I walked by it every day as I was in high school and, 8th grade, 7th grade, all those things, middle school. I walked by it every day and I never took the time to stop and read it and see what it was for. There's 3 pictures of 3 different people holding this like big plaque that now hangs on the wall. And one of those people is my dad. But I never knew what it was for. And apparently a similar situation had happened on a rig that my father was working on, and a helicopter had essentially taken off, had a few people inside of it. The engine had died, but the helicopter came and slammed back into the housing units, and blades came into the housing units. And my dad and 2 others were credited for being able to save the life of the pilot, as well as 2 more that were on board. They actually jumped into the ocean to be able to grab them and pull them back onto the rig and then get them evac'd. And so I was like, you're a hero. I was like, holy moly, But the question then comes up, what made you do that? Like, why? In that moment, we'd all like to believe that we're the people that would run toward the fire, or toward the noise. And a lot of the people in my family are veterans that did that, which I have immense respect for. And even my mother is a veteran of the Air Force. And I think that, we're drawn to that again because of this undying commitment that my grandfather had, that he just kind of instilled in all of us to say, when things go wrong, I'm not going to be the one that is, afraid or scared, or even if I am, still being able to have the courage to jump in the water and say, I can go help, right? Or to run toward the fire. And that's something that it's seldomly tested, but when you see it, it's so, there's so much admiration that I have for those kind of people. And so the question again became, where does that come from? Like, why did you do that? Why did you feel like it had to be you? And a lot of it, my dad said, well, I think that they would have done it for me. I believe that they would have had my back. But I think it just boils down to the fact of like our family, like the people that are in it. We love other people. We want to be there for them, and we want to be able to whether it be as simple as, talking through a business conversation and helping you out financially, or whether it be saving your life, it's like our family wants that for you. And I think that was instilled by them.
Man, what a heritage.
It's crazy. It's wild to think about.
Well, and it explains an awful lot to me about who you are, because you are such a unique person. And you, as me, as someone who has gotten to know you incredibly well over the past couple of years, sure can understand you a lot better right now. Just because like that is how we become like 5 people we spend the most time with. And so, so I'm dying to know, why do you call him Otis and not Pappy?
Well, so Pappy, the difference is that Pappy was Otis's father.
Oh, okay.
And so we always called him Pappy. And so Otis, if I'm speaking to Otis, I'm going to say, "Hey, Grandpa, how are you?" Right? But there's also, what's really funny is that after Otis passed away, I noticed that I started saying his name more often. And I think it's because like, I don't want it to be forgotten, because it's a very unique name. First off, like I would probably name my kid Otis. I don't know if Morgan would agree. Maybe we'll name our next little doggy Otis. I don't know. But, I don't want it to be forgotten. I feel like the legacy that he left and parted upon our family, upon myself, my father, my mother, my sister, all of us really kind of feel that. It reverberates through us all the time. As much as we are there for other people, we're there for each other. And so, I started saying, rather than saying Grandpa, I started saying Otis a lot more. And I think it's trying to like pay homage to that name and to that understanding of the legacy that he left and what he built. And, it might not seem like much to a lot of people, but whenever my dad and I started talking, and we started digging deeper into like, why do we do the things that we do? Like, where are we coming from? And why do sometimes people not understand us? Like, we think about things in a different way. And I think everyone experiences that whenever you have a conversation with someone and like, you're just not lining up. You're like, I don't understand why you're not getting what I'm saying. And it's weird to think that like, I really truly feel like it comes from the heritage that we have and the legacy that Otis left. And I can say that for, my uncle Russell, he's the same way. If I pick up the phone tomorrow and I said, Russell, I need your help, he's there 100%. He would drive from wherever he is to come and help me. And that's a mark of a really good person. There's a song that they say, like, you find out who your friends are, right? If you get stuck on the side of the road and, you call someone, there's plenty of people that can say, I'm not available, I've got this going on. And then there's other people that are like, I'll drop everything for you. And I think we were kind of, since the day that we were born, we were told that that's the only way you're supposed to do it, is you drop what's important in your world to go help someone else. I don't really know where that came from. Only thing I can point to is my grandfather.
It sounds like it's almost like you had Zig Ziglar as your grandfather, because he's so infamous for saying the best way to get what you like, what you want in life, is to help enough other people get what they want. Mm-hmm. And so how have you seen the rewards of living your life this way? What rewards would you say regularly happen to you and your family that like come out of nowhere?
I mean, throughout my life, I think that the position that I'm in now, the things that I'm doing now, I should have never been in this world. When we look back at like who I was when I was younger, the things that I wanted to be able to accomplish as I was younger, and then coming into, the world that I'm in today. And my father just asked me, right? Like, how did you get where you are? Like, that was an honest question that he was asking me on the phone. And I was like, I don't really know, Dad. Like, I don't know how I got to the position of being able to lead some of the most successful realtors in Albuquerque. I think it comes from a place of servant leadership, but I also think people recognize that I wanted to be there not for myself and not to grow myself, but to be able to help others. And, whenever I did a Keller personality assessment with my leader, which is Jama, and she's my superior. And so we did a Keller personality assessment, and in that personality assessment, it ranks you against the top 10% of performers inside of the company. So it takes your exact answers and ranks it against the top 10% of performers in every job field that we have inside of Keller Williams. And there's a lot of things that I rank very high for as far as, and what it's looking for is not so much whether or not you can do the job, it's about job satisfaction. Whether or not you think that, this is something that you can do over the long term and it will give you energy over time. And so that's really what the assessment is used for. And in it, I was ranking very low as far as job satisfaction on the team leader side, and on the, vice president of development, which is what I do now. And in there, I'll never forget it. We went through the entire Keller personality assessment, and inside of operating style, there was a section called team dynamics. And she read me the paragraph from team dynamics, and she had it highlighted. So I didn't know whether that was good or bad. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. But she read me the section of it, and it was talking about how, I'm the kind of person who is what I guess you would call galvanizing. Like, I am very good at bringing people together and, forming groups of consensus and kind of driving toward a common goal, and creating alignment within a group, whether it be a small team or a team of, brokers who are independent contractors. And I told her, I said, that's a 10. That sounds like me. Like that's all I've ever wanted to do. If I could stop doing everything else and just do that, I would love my life. Right. And she said, even though this KPA is saying there's not a lot of job satisfaction in this, she said, this statement right here is what I would want a team leader to be inside of that office. Like if you can do this thing, then you will be successful in that role. And so to answer my father's question, how did I get there? Truly, how I got here, I think, is based off of the things that were taught to me when I was younger, about doing things like keeping your word. We had a long conversation about like, one of the things that's very important in our family is like honor, right? Like I told you it's going to get done and I'm going to do it. I don't care what it takes, but I'll do it. Right. And even if it comes at great sacrifice for whoever promised you that, we still get it done. And my sister does that all the time. Like she, ran one of the most profitable stores for cattle bearing, in Ruidoso for years, not because she was in love with the restaurant business, but because she promised she would do it, and we'll go to the end of the earth for that. And so I think that that's a part of it, is that the promises that I make to people, I refuse to, let fall by the wayside. I want to make sure that if I promise that this thing will happen for you, that I'm going to drive it home. And I don't need anything in return for that. And I think that that's just putting that out to the world. It's something that's not very common today. It was common then with my pappy, and it was common then with Otis, but I don't know that it's something that's extremely common today. And so I think that people look to that and they see leadership in that, and they see, and maybe an innate ability that others might not see, because of your ability to say, I'll sacrifice and get it done.
Gosh, what a legacy. What a legacy. So what does Otis's example make you want to do more of?
I don't know. I just kind of want to, it's like I told you, I kind of just want to make sure that this ideal doesn't go by the wayside. And in the time that we're in, everything that's happened over the last few years and the sacrifices that many of us had to make, I think being able to refocus and say it's for a reason, it's really important right now. I think that mentally, you call around to therapists and counselors and everything else, and everyone's booked out and everyone's so busy, because I think the world is missing something there. And I think for me, it starts with keeping your promises, and starts with honor, and it starts with, understanding that we're here for each other at the end of the day. Anything that I create inside of this world, I can't get buried with, right? But I'll get buried with my decisions.
That's pretty deep, and it's very true. You never saw a hearse followed by a U-Haul, so that's sorry. Okay, so I have a question for you because you talked about how your uncle would stop whatever he's doing and he would drive to wherever you are. I'm assuming your sister would do the same. Your parents would do the same. So how does that impact your willingness to try new things and to do things and to take chances?
I mean, that's what I think breeds a lot of our success is, one of our leaders inside of Keller Williams, Tommy, said recently that the gap between potential and performance is confidence. And having a family unit, that builds that confidence behind you, that will drop what they're doing to come and help you. I mean, that leads us to performance. So I think a lot of the things that I'm willing to go out and try and do, and jump in, both feet, whatever it might be, I think it's because I feel like I do have a safety net. And I think I got a major head start from my family, right? And I know that others don't experience that, right? There's others that maybe don't have family that's there for them. But for me, I think that major head start doesn't just necessarily come from physically being there or financially being there. It's more of the mentality or the ideal behind it. And I think it took me a while to understand the ideals that our family held, which is why I was kind of rebellious in my younger age and why, I thought I knew everything and didn't want to go to college. But it was built off of the idea of that like ranch life of hard work and nothing comes unless you make it, and I think it's a bad thing to say, maybe like it's a bad thing to say if it must be, it's up to me, because there are people around you that want to support you. However, I think that that's a part of kind of what it is whenever I say about like keeping a promise is like, if I tell you, Kara, I'm going to get this done for you, I know that nothing will happen unless I'm the one that does it, because I'm the one who made the promise and no one else is bought in and no one else is really wanting that for you like I am, because it's my promise that was made, not someone else's. I can't rely on someone else to fulfill that for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, especially after working with you for over 2 years now and everything you've told me you have done. I never think twice about it. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about my team too. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, can you do this? Yes. Okay. Then I don't have to, did Jake do what he said he was going to do? Because you always do. Mm-hmm. So
that's awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Which is part of the culture, which makes it that the whole market center has. Now, I understand. What would you say, Jake, to the people that don't drink the Kool-Aid, that don't show up for the meetings, that don't get coaching, that don't come to classes? What would you say to those people who are out on the outskirts that just really have not taken advantage of the habits that are going on in this office?
I would say there's always a choice to be made, right? You make decisions based off of what you believe is best for you or your family. Keller Williams and what's happening inside of the market center, inside of our office, is really here and designed to be a supportive role, right? We'll support you in whatever pursuits you might have. What I would be concerned with, or what my first question would be, is, really kind of check your mindset. I think it's human nature for us when we feel like we're underperforming, or we feel like there might not be a way out and things are getting hard. We kind of recluse ourselves a little bit and we start to step away from the things that might be the game changers and things that will affect change in our life. And so I would first say, check your mindset. Are you actually doing yourself a disservice by not participating in these things? And then on the second side of that is that I would ask about clarity. Do you have absolute clarity on the promises that you've made to yourself, to your family, and to the people around you? And if you do, you have absolute clarity around that. How are you marching toward them? What tools are you using to be able to get support in that? How are you building that confidence that can move you toward, performance? So that would be, I think, the first kind of questions I would be asking if we were, coaching or consulting with someone is, how are you feeling right now? Do you feel like you're successful? Do you feel like you're really nailing it? And if you are, that's fantastic. That's great news, right? Do you feel like anything inside of this space is going to help you, whether that be from training or simply surrounding yourself with others in cultural events? It could be simply from the international company, having things like MAPS coaching, having things like Bold, having things like, that network that's really built out there for you that's very large. Can you benefit from that? And are you taking full advantage? Because a lot of times I think we don't maximize our potential in things. We don't maximize our potential inside of organizations, inside of tools that we use. A lot of times when I consult brokers and we talk about simply their contact database management system, are you utilizing it for these 5 things? And they're like, I don't know if it does those things. It's like, well, if you don't know, you probably haven't maximized its potential, which means you're actually wasting money. If you're spending money on that thing and you're only using it for $5 worth of its potential and it's worth $25 a month, you've got a problem, right? And I look at Keller Williams in the same way. If we're built as a supportive training coaching company that provides technology solutions, if you're going to be spending money to be able to work with an organization, are you maximizing that organization's use to you?
Yeah. And likely not. Just like our cell phones, we probably only use a fraction of what they'll do for us. Mm-hmm. All right. So any last stories, anything from maybe when you were a child with Otis, a memory from when you were a little kid where he was just bigger than life?
Whenever we were young, so we used to go to Louisiana. We moved from Louisiana to New Mexico when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. So it was right before I started kindergarten. I know that because I remember that next year I started kindergarten in Ruidoso. My sister had already been going to school. So what originally happened is that my father worked for Gulf Oil. And like I said, he was in an animal husbandry's degree because they needed a veterinarian. So he started in animal husbandries. And then during that time, University of Southern Louisiana had a program in which you could do 7 days of school and then you would have 7 days off so that you could go work in the oil field. So on my dad's 7 days off, he would go offshore and he would work for Gulf Oil. And then whenever he came back, he would go back to his animal husbandry's degree. The goal is that he would do animal husbandries at University of Southern Louisiana, and then he would go and get his veterinarian degree at Louisiana State, so LSU. So that was what the goal was. When he applied at LSU, he was denied. And so at that point, he had already been working for Gulf for a long time, and a hurricane hit the Gulf, and these oil platforms were going down, and my father had stayed behind on the platforms to be able to be that person who checks everything and makes things up and running. Little did he know, during that time frame, Chevron was going to buy Gulf Oil. And they laid everyone off in Gulf except for my dad and a few other people because they kept these platforms in this oil field up and running. Then shortly after that, he was promoted and they moved him to be a project engineer in Angola. And so he started working in Cabinda, Angola in Africa. And during that time, it was easier for him to fly home from Angola just straight north to England or Paris than it was for him to come back across the Atlantic. So we moved, my mother moved me and my sister to England for 2 years, or Paris for 2 years. Then we went to England for 2 years where Leanne started school. And so Leanne was already in school in England. And then she came home one time and mom told me the story. She came home and she opened up the trunk and they were unloading groceries. And my sister looked at my mom and said, do you want this in as well? And she was like, okay, we gotta go. We're leaving. So mom moved back to Lafayette, Louisiana. She called my grandmother Rose to come and get us. And we moved back to Lafayette, Louisiana. And we actually moved to St. Martinville. And my sister started school. And I think she was going to Como at the time. But she started falling behind in schooling. The education that was given to her in England was far superior to what she was receiving in the United States. And so a big storm came through Lafayette at that same time frame. And it messed up our house real bad, a big hurricane. And so my mom called my dad and said, we're leaving. We're moving out of Louisiana. She asked him, where was that place that you took me on our honeymoon? And he said, it's a small little town in New Mexico called Ruidoso. And she said, okay, that's where we're moving to. And so we packed up all of our stuff. Dad came back from Africa, put everything in a U-Haul, and we drove from Louisiana to Ruidoso. And then Leanne started school in Ruidoso, and I came into kindergarten that following year. And then we grew up, through Ruidoso. But every summer we would go back to Louisiana to go see my grandmother Rose, and then my grandfather. Rose was on my mom's side, and then my grandfather Otis. And he was married to Becky, who was the mother of my other uncle named Zach. And we kind of looked at Zach as a brother. He was the same age as us. So Otis had Zach, right about the same time that Leanne was born. So he was the same age, and we kind of always hung out together. Whenever we went to Louisiana, we would see him, and he was growing up in Louisiana and, went through Catholic schools and stuff there while we were in Ruidoso, but we were always kind of together. He would come to Ruidoso and go skiing with us in the wintertime. We'd go to summers and go hang out with him. So it was always awesome. So we always call him really like our brother. And we originally kind of, when we were going down there, we would stay on what we called the compound, where like my entire family lived on this like 100 acres that was right next to the airport in Lafayette. There was a restaurant there called Evangeline Seafood and Steakhouse that everyone worked inside of. So like my whole family, like multiple generations, all living in this one area, and they would work inside of this restaurant. And so we would stay there and mow the grass in the summertime and do those kind of things. But it was always awesome because we would go to my grandfather's house, who was right down the road. And he was an avid golfer. He won the Pecos Open a long time ago, whenever that was a thing. But he was an avid golfer. So in his backyard, he owned this big corner lot. It was like a triangular lot. He created a green, and he went and bought like a greens mower. And that's where Leanne and I learned how to play golf.
Very cool.
Yeah, from my grandfather. So there's pictures of us where, he's kind of over the top of us as little kids, and he's showing us how to swing the golf club. And we would hit balls in his backyard and go and putt on the putting green. And now that greens mower, there's a place called The Farm in Karen Crow, Louisiana. If you ever get a chance to go play that golf course, it's beautiful. A lady from the LPGA actually started it on her father's old ranch. And they bought the greens mower to create the greens out there from my grandfather whenever they first started that place, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
But he eventually moved to New Iberia there was a Douglas Trent Jones golf course there called La Triomphe. And so he eventually moved into that subdivision. And that's where he passed away, was whenever he was living there. But before, he was just right down the road from us, and we could easily go see him. And he had this old white Bronco that he drove that was like lifted. He would like drive it through the mud and stuff when he was in it. It was so much fun. He would take us fishing and hunting and doing all sorts of stuff. And my godmother, Rain, and my cousin Josh, and another Jerry Ann and Clayton, they own a ranch called Dry Creek Ranch in Louisiana. It's just north of Lake Charles. And so sometimes Rain would drive down to the compound and pick me and my sister up, and we would go there and we'd go ride horses and hang out for a few weeks with them. So it was kind of a cool way to grow up, and everyone in our family was kind of in the same mix of things, ranching and, land jobs and, working in the oil field and that kind of stuff. It was kind of the only thing to really do down there. So it was what we were used to. So it was a lot of fun growing up, but Grandpa was always kind of there to, take us around. And
sounds like a great man. Yeah. What was one habit that he had that you would like to perfect in yourself?
One of the things that he did, this is another kind of story about Otis, that I really, really want to learn how to do, and I never had the time to be able to sit down and learn from him, was he was an avid gunsmith, and he had kind of taught everything to himself. So if you want to talk about a habit, the habit of self-mastery, that guy was on it, man. I'm telling you, like, being able to master something and teach himself. He would read books, he would read magazines, he was on the internet, everything he could possibly learn. He was just soaking it all up, but he was so focused on whatever it was. He wouldn't pay attention to the outside world. It was like, I want to learn this thing and I want to get so good at it, right? And even golfing, right? Like everything that he did in his life, he was the best at, right? He was a fantastic helicopter pilot. He was a great player in golf. He was an awesome gunsmith. And it was because he would just hone his focus on just that thing and nothing else mattered to him. And you can say that was good and bad. I mean, my dad complains all the time about, how he was worked so hard and all this stuff as a kid around Otis, but that's what it took. That's what it took to be able to build the character I think that my father has today. And so I'd like to be able to build that habit of really mastery inside of my life. And then one of the things that I really want to learn is, his ability he could see things. And as far as like gunsmithing was concerned, and he could see them differently than other people. So, one time I told him, I said, I really want to build a gun. I want to build a 38-30 lever action with an octagon barrel. And he immediately knew right off the bat. He was like, this is what you need to do. He's like, go down to a gun show and find a lever action that the barrel's been shot out of. So no one will want to buy it. It's going to be super cheap, but the lever action is going to be what you want from that gun. And then go and get this, and then go. And he had all the, set up in his mind. He already kind of see how it could come together. And one of the guns that I currently own is my hunting rifle. It's a 30-06 that he designed and built. And this was way back in the day. And so he was, it was either him or my father. I can't remember which one it was, but he had built this gun. He took a Mauser action off of a German rifle in the war and sent it home to himself. And then whenever he came home, he built this gun around this Mauser action that would shoot 30-06 rounds. And he hand carved maple stock to be able to fit. And whenever he hand carved it, he floated the barrel on it. And then he also included on the side the very first cheek plate that was ever put onto a rifle, which in long distance rifles, it's used to be able to press against your cheek so that you can see into the scope. And it just makes the actual butt of the gun a little more comfortable. But he designed that, and he never patented it, but he would publish things inside of this magazine. A long time ago, Remington used to take gunsmith advice and they'd put it all into one magazine and ship it out to these different gunsmiths. And so he put it in that and said, oh, this is something you might want to, put on your long distance rifles. And of course, someone else patented it. And then another time, my father, I think it was my dad, was running through the woods with that gun, and he tripped and fell and hit the barrel onto a rock, and it chipped the very front rifling where the bullet comes out. And so Otis saw that, and he was like, well, it would be smart if you just cut the inside of it a little bit deeper than the exterior, so that if it ever hit anything, it would never touch the rifling. And so that was what is now called a long distance crown. And so he put that in that magazine to say this is something, gunsmiths should do. And then of course Remington came out and patented it later as a long distance crown. But that was, his ability to really master something and then see the possibilities with it. That's something that I wish that, I could just work on day in and day out, because it's amazing to have that vision and be able to solve problems that people don't even know there's a problem yet.
Can I just enlighten you?
Mm-hmm.
You already do that.
Oh, thank you.
Seriously, you're not seeing it, but like, I think something that the public, and this is more of a family thing, but that the public doesn't understand is real estate. And not that you were buying and selling homes, but you're helping 320 of us that do. Real estate, it's never the same. And there's different problems all the time. And I have not yet come to you with an issue that you didn't go, well, what about this? And I'm like, what? Why didn't I think of that? Right. So you're already doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I hope so. That's very gracious. Thank you. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, the habit of something else that I think comes from him, right? My dad, when he left Chevron, was the only guy in the company that knew how to design, build, and install jet engine compressors on oil platforms. And so they actually made him stay behind and write a manual on how to do that. That way they could continue functioning and he could retire. So he had to stay another 2 years and live in Houston to be able to write that manual. But it's, again, I think it's like over time, my father got hyper focused on what it was that he needed to master, and in the very beginning, and I think over his entire career, my father had the best safety rating of anybody in the company, and he was very focused and honed that skill. And then he moved on and was able to hone a new skill. And I think that that's something that we picked up from our family of mastery of one singular thing, not branching out and trying to do 1,000 things and it's throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And it's more about if it doesn't work now, I'm going to keep working on it until it works. I'm going to keep pushing it forward. And it's just that relentless pursuit. That's the habit that I want to be able to die with.
There you go. So what is your next thing you really want to focus on?
For me, I'm really trying to become a really great gardener right now. So I've always had a little small garden in my house or in my backyard. And, I got really good at it the last couple of years. But I just planted a peach tree, a year ago, and now it's kind of growing up real big. And then I'm also going to put a cherry tree in. And so I want to get really good at that. I'm watching a bunch of videos on YouTube and like reading a lot. Trying to understand like farmers' almanacs and that kind of stuff. But I want to get really, really good at that because there's something about, I think, like growing food, and being able to turn it into something that you want and even gift that to someone else. That's really cool. Like I really enjoy, I grow jalapenos and green beans and okra, and I'll take that and I'll pickle it, and, can it. And then it's good. It can sit on your shelf for, years. And so I can give that out to people, and, it's kind of gifts that I can give. And then I make my own salsa. So I have a bunch of stuff that, I can use to be able to make salsa, and I'll can that and be able to give that away. But yeah, what I really want to do is be able to get good with, fruit trees. I found out that I started wrong with the peach tree, but I'm going to fix it. Everything's going to be okay. And then I really want to do a cherry tree because my wife loves cherries. And so I want to be able to can those, so that she's got, fresh cherries from the backyard. So
what a mighty good man. All right. Is there any last parting wisdom that you want to leave our audience with, or?
No, I guess so. I would just say, I think that this conversation and everything that I've talked about with my family and, everything that I've been thinking about recently over I would say the past, 5 days, 7 days, it's really about being there for each other and, always trusting that the person to the left of you and the person to the right of you has your best interest at heart. I think that sprung up a little bit in the conversation that we had, when we kind of talked about the things that you've gone through, and finding true advocates, whether that be in the medical fields or whether that be in, therapy or coaching or whatever it might be. And I think I started thinking about that and trying to understand, why is it that people trust certain people, and why is it that, these things happen? And I think that the world just needs a lot more of like us being there for each other and really being an advocate with no, separate agenda. And so I would hope that if anyone listens to this, they hear, what it means to be trustworthy and faithful and, caring for just your fellow person.
So let's say someone listening to this doesn't have any advocates. They really are around the wrong people. It could be even their family, which makes it hard. What's the first step for them?
I think putting yourself in that position, being open to put yourself in that position to find those people. And I don't want to say hold your cards, close to your heart. I think that it takes a lot of, opening a hand and saying, I'm willing to accept it, whatever it might be. And then put yourself into that world, whatever you're chasing after. So, seek out if it's, that you want to be able to earn more, go and find networks of people that are high earners. If you want to be able to be more, godly, go and find that church community that's going to make that come true for you. And then in that, you'll find those advocates. You'll find those people. They shine through. I think we can identify it. And like I said, I think that's how I got where I was or where I am, is that, people see that. I think that the organizations that I worked in, the things that I've done for Marriott Hotels, for the franchise company that franchised Marriott into BC Lind, all the way into, Argo Network and Keller Williams Realty, I think people truly can look at me and say, he's an advocate for his people and he's a supportive leader. And that's, all I want to be every day.
Well, I applaud you. You've done it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.